They could watch Noah building that boat every day. They couldn't watch a miracle coming. He could preach, hey, 10 more days, you're all going to drop over. Yeah, right, yeah, right. But they could see that boat going together day after day. It was a constant reminder that they could have gotten saved. And they could have and should have. So, how could a flood cover the whole world? I was debating at University of West Florida, my first debate I ever had, here in Pensacola about 15 years ago. I'd had a few debates with my wife before that, and I lost those all, so I was not excited about debating this professor, but yeah, you're laughing, you know, don't you guys? I debated this professor, and one of the kids in the audience, we had Q&A time afterwards, he said, Hovind, could it rain enough to cover the earth? He said, you think it really rained enough to cover Mount Everest? He said, don't you know when it rains, the more heat is released? I said, oh yeah, I understand, I taught physics. It's called the latent heat of condensation. He said, well, heat is released when moisture turns to liquid, and if it rained enough to cover Mount Everest, it would completely cook the world. I said, you're right. He said, but you think it rained enough to cover Mount Everest? I said, no, I never said that. No, you're assuming that Mount Everest was there to begin with, and you're assuming all the water came from rain. You got two very false assumptions in your thinking here. What about this flood? Several theories about the flood. I'm going to give you the Hovind theory of what I think happened to cause that flood, what triggered it, where did the water come from, where did it go, and what effects can we see today? Now, we cover much on what the original creation was like on Seminar Part 2. The Bible says there was a canopy of water above the atmosphere and water under the crust of the earth. Psalm 24 says, the earth is the Lord's. He founded it upon the seas and established it upon the floods. Psalm 33 says, He layeth up the waters He layeth up the depth in storehouses. The water used to be under the crust of the earth. Psalm 136, He stretched out the earth above the waters. See, when God first made the world, the crust of the earth was stretched over. Most of the water that's now on top was underneath the crust of the earth. There were vast subterranean water chambers. There are still huge amounts of water, huge water chambers down in the earth. The Japanese drilled down, I forget how far, just recently in early 2003, and they said there's probably more water deep in the crust of the earth than there is on the surface of the earth. Just found earlier this year. There's a whole lot of water down there. Well, the Bible says the fountains of the deep broke open. And it says all of them in one day broke open. Here's what I think happened. The earth has cracks all over it. Seams like a baseball. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge, the San Andreas Fault, the Hayward Fault, the New Madrid Fault, the Golden Fault, the Ring of Fire. None of them my fault, but there's no question. The earth is all busted up into plates, and the earth has gone through some really hard times. It's busted up like an eggshell. I think that happened at the time of the flood, not millions of years ago. The Bible says in Job 38, or who shut up the sea with doors when it brake forth as if it had issued out of the womb? And break for it my decree. He said, He put my decreed place. Your proud waves can't go any farther. There's a beach that stops it from coming up here. But the Bible says the water gushed out of the earth like water out of a womb. I delivered one of my kids at home. If you've never seen a baby get born, you need to see that. One of my friends in college, he was up there getting ready. His wife's going to have a baby. She's standing there fixing breakfast, and her water broke. Whoosh, all over the floor. He came running in to see what's going on, and he slipped and broke his arm. She had to drive him to the hospital. Set his arm while I have this kid, would you please? I mean, the water just gushes out sometimes when they have a baby. And God said the water gushed out of the earth when it broke up. I think the plates of the earth broke apart. The fault lines are still there today from what happened during that flood. And the earth is broken up into plates, and the plates are still moving a little bit, which causes earthquakes, volcanoes. You know, I've studied all that stuff, taught earth science for years. People say, wait a minute, isn't that proof of Pangea? No, that's not proof of Pangea. Textbooks say all the continents fit together. Well, that's baloney. They don't tell the kids, the truth about this. This textbook says South America and Africa seem to be a perfect fit. That's a pure coincidence, folks, based on the water level. Here's the evidence they give to support continental drift. They'll say the shapes of the continent seem to fit. Similar fossils are found on opposite sides of the ocean. Textbook says, see this? Same fossils found in Africa and South America. Well, so what? Those same fossils are actually found all over the world. This is just as much proof of a worldwide flood. How far could the dead animals float in a year? So they point out the two found on opposite sides of the ocean, but they don't point out the same ones are found everywhere. They don't point that out because they're trying to push off a theory on the kids. This is evidence of a flood, not evidence of Pangea. And then they say there are magnetic reversals in the ocean floor. No, there are no magnetic reversals. We'll get into that in a second. They don't tell the kids they shrank Africa nearly 40% to make them fit. If you cut it out get a globe and cut Africa out, and then cut South America out and compare it to what they did in their textbook. They shrank Africa between 35 and 40%. All of Mexico and Central America are gone in the Pangea maps. Señor, ¿qué pasa? ¿Dónde está Mexico, Panama, Costa Rica, Guatemala? They don't tell the kids that Europe and South America rotated one way and Africa was rotated a different way. They also don't tell the kids what I think ought to be obvious to a kindergartner. Did you know if you take the water out of the oceans, you will notice there is dirt underneath? There is. I mean, the oceans actually have a bottom. People say, do you think the continents were connected? I say, what do you mean, were? They still are. It's just the low places are full of water, that's all. It's not like these are hollow, it's hollow under here and they're floating around like lily pads in a bathtub, The Earth has a solid crust, okay? And I think the Pangea theory is one of the dumbest theories in the world, but textbooks say there are magnetic reversals. No, there are magnetic reversals. Walt Brown's got a great section in his book about the so-called magnetic reversals, if you want to read more on that, or go to his website, creationscience.com, or you can get the book through our ministry. Textbooks say these reversals in the magnetic field indicate millions of years of spreading of the ocean floor. Well, I agree the ocean floor is spreading, and I agree the continents are moving, but I don't think it's been millions of years, okay? This is a lie in the textbooks. There aren't really magnetic reversals. There are areas of stronger and weaker magnetism. Here's what happened. They measured the magnetic intensity in the layers of the Earth at the middle, especially the mid-Atlantic ridge, and they found some places were stronger magnetically and some places were weaker. Stronger field, stronger, weaker, so they drew a sine wave. Then somebody drew a line through the middle and called everything below average a reversal. Below average is not reversed. If we line up everybody in the room and find out the average height is 5'7", does that mean everybody less than 5'7" is reversed down in the ground, or are they just less than 5'7"? See, less magnetic intensity does not mean reversed magnetic intensity. There's no place on the ocean floor where a north-seeking compass will point south in relation to the rock. When they drill down, it gets even more jumbled up, as this graph shows from Brian Young's book, Doubts About Creation. Out after this, you can get that through our ministry. How much is that, Dan? Do you remember what we sell that for? $11.95. Excellent book on, I think that's correct. You can get our website on if you have doubts about creation, read that book. That'll straighten them out. Actually, the magnetic field's getting weaker, which indicates the Earth is less than 25,000 years old. Of course, the evolutionists can't have that, okay? But the magnetic field's decline is really a proof for a young Earth. Walt Brown's theory is excellent on the fault lines and how the plates spread about. We'll cover that in a second. Here's Walt Brown's hydroplate theory.
We can see on our planet 17 very strange features which can now be systematically explained as a result of a cataclysmic global flood whose waters erupted from subterranean chambers with an energy release exceeding the explosion of 10 billion hydrogen bombs. This explanation shows us just how rapidly major mountains formed. It explains the coal and oil deposits, the rapid continental drift, why on the ocean floor there are huge trenches and hundreds of canyons and volcanoes. It explains the formation of the layered strata and most of the fossils, the frozen mammoths, the so-called ice ages, and major land canyons, especially the Grand Canyon. The pre-flood Earth probably had only one very large supercontinent covered with lush vegetation. There were seas and major rivers. The mountains were smaller than today's, but perhaps 9,000 feet high. According to the hydroplate theory, the pre-flood Earth had a lot of subterranean water, about half of what is now in our oceans. This water was contained in interconnected chambers, forming a thin spherical shell about half a mile thick, perhaps 10 miles below the Earth's surface. Increasing pressure in the subterranean water stretched the crust just as a balloon stretches when the pressure inside increases. Failure in the crust began with a microscopic crack which grew in both directions at about 3 miles per second. The crack, following the path of least resistance, encircled the globe in about 2 hours. As the crack raced around the Earth, the overlying rock crust opened up like a rip in a tightly stretched cloth. The subterranean water was under extreme pressure because of the weight of the 10 miles of rock pressing down on it. So the water exploded violently out of the rupture. All along this globe-encircling rupture, fountains of water jetted supersonically, almost 20 miles into the atmosphere. The spray from this enormous fountain produced torrential rains, such as the Earth has never experienced before or after. The Bible states that all the fountains of the great deep burst open on one day. And it describes these events about 5,000 years ago, which we can now tie together scientifically. Some of the water jetting high above the cold stratosphere froze into supercooled ice crystals and produced some massive ice dumps, burying, suffocating, and instantly freezing many animals, including the frozen mammoths of Siberia and Alaska. The high-pressure fountains eroded the rock on both sides